Up there, I've entitled the presentation this morning, Posting an Armed Guard, with a question mark. Well, where's my question mark? Well, anyway, it's posting an armed guard. It's a question that will create some pretty interesting discussions. 25 years ago, I would have said, absolutely not. You do not post an armed guard. God has given us guardian angels. God will take care of his people. I grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is basically a pacifist church. They believe in, have a pacifist point of view. And so I would not have a gun in my home, would never post an armed guard, because Jesus said to turn the other cheek. Jesus said to love your enemy. And so that's exactly, I was going to follow what Jesus taught us to do. And then about 25 years ago, I decided to go into the Word of God to find out just why I was a pacifist. And so I'm going to share with you the results of my study this morning. Now, in some churches, you have signs like this. It says, love is the spirit of this church, no weapons permitted, weapons prohibited. That would have been my church 25 years ago. That's the kind of sign I would have wanted in my church. And then this pastor made the nightly news on Fox. Pastor vows to protect his parishioners. We say it again. We are not a gun-free zone. What? A church? Not a gun-free zone? Now this church, United Church of Christ, says this church is a gun-free zone. Love your enemy. Jesus made that statement. That would be my church. And then you've got this church. It's a large church there in Tampa Bay. It says, warning, please know this is not a gun-free zone. We are heavily armed. Any attempt will be dealt with deadly force. Yes, we are a church, and we will protect our people, the pastors. Why would a church post such a sign? Well, it may be because of some of these reports here. Notice this one here. Church in Texas. Over 150 teenagers at church singing hymns. Suspect entered and shot 14 people, ended up killing 7, injuring another 7 before killing himself. Church in Wisconsin. Suspect opened fire on the congregation, killing 7 and wounding 4 before taking his own life. He was described by people that knew him as a normal guy with no warning signs. A church in Colorado. The suspect was asked to leave a youth center, returned, opened fire, killing 2 and injured 2. 35 minutes later, he went to church and killed 2 people. A church in Illinois. Suspect walks into the church and shoots the pastor dead, point blank. I don't like that one. Several church members confronted the shooter with aggression and overpowered him. Here's a temple in Wisconsin. A male suspect fatally shot 6 people and wounded 4 others in mass shooting. The suspect committed suicide by shooting himself in the head. They just keep going. Church in Ohio, a suspect killed his father at the church. Afterwards, he shouted about Allah and God. The suspect was later arrested by the police. In a book written by Carl Chin, he's the author of Evil Invades Sanctuary, the Case for Security in Faith-Based Organization, has reported 689 deadly force deaths on faith-based properties since 1999. Over half of these were committed in the last 5 years. Now that's a significant increase in violence. The vast majority of American churches are soft targets. It's not only the buildings that are soft targets, but it's also the lack of preparation and training of church staff and volunteers. Less than 25% of all American churches have any sort of security ministry, as written by Carl Chin. USA Today. The Islamic State is urging its followers to attack U.S. churches and has published names and addresses of thousands of prospective targets, according to a report in the news website Vocative. I wonder if my church is on that list. And for this reason, Homeland Security has produced some resources to protect your house of worship. There's the worship down there. This was translated from a PC to a Mac. And anytime you deal with Macs, you're going to have problems, right? Yes, I'm a PC man. So anyway, it says across the United States, Americans congregate in faith-based venues to worship, learn, play, and bond as a community. However, public gatherings are vulnerable, and adversaries may perceive houses of worship as attractive targets where they can inflict mass casualties, cause substantial psychological impact, and draw. The rest is down there somewhere. Oh, let's see. Oh, wait, it might be. Yeah, and draw. No, it was just, we needed to shorten that one. They continue. The Department of Homeland Security has established a comprehensive program focused on active shooter preparedness in order to position public and private sector stakeholders to more effectively plan and prepare against this threat. Following the run, hide, fight concept, the program delivers online and in-person training. So Homeland Security is taking this seriously. They're concerned about places like this where people gather together. They're saying, churches, you better take your head out of the sand and at least think about this, study this. There's danger. Even the Seventh-day Adventist Church, through the Adventist Risk Management, is on their website encouraging us to think about this. And so their website says, active shooter, what to do. It's a moment that no one ever expects, but should. What to do in an active shooter situation. It's a stressful time as thoughts of escape, prayers, and reflections of your loved ones fill your head. There's no single response that fits all active shooter situations, but knowing what to do can make a difference. So is the church wanting us to think about this situation? You bet they are. They want us to give some thought and consideration to that if somebody came through those back doors right now with an automatic rifle, what would we do? We don't like to think about those things, and we haven't. We've kept that out of our mind because we like to think of positive things. But the church is wanting us to give some thought and consideration, what to do. And here's what they say. This is what they want you to do if that were to happen. They say lockout. First of all, if something activity is going on out there that doesn't look right, lock the doors. That's the first step. If you're able to get out, that's what you're to do. Get out if you can. But in a situation like in a congregation like this, if somebody walks through the door, do you know what the congregation's going to instinctively do? Duck, right? You're gonna hide down, get down. But they're saying, no, you need to take out that person. Because if you don't, you will die. There will be a mass casualty in your congregation. So you have to take him out. And in the figure, they have a little man holding a club, baseball bat. That's considered a deadly weapon. By definition, that's a deadly weapon. So they're saying, we want you to take out that person. Well, that's contrary to my belief. See? No, I give the enemy a cup of cold water. See? I turn the other cheek. That's what I was raised believing. And so this is a very conflicting message for me, because no, I can't take out this person. That would hurt him. And then this statement here, this is from Jan Paulson. He's the former Seventh-day Adventist General Conference president. He made this statement in a March 2008 Adventist World article. When you carry arms, you imply that you are prepared to use them to take another's life. And taking the life of one of God's children, even that of our enemy, an active shooter, is inconsistent with what we know to be sacred and right. That harmonizes with the official statement of the Adventist Church in 1972, voted statement. It says, this partnership with God through Jesus Christ, who came into this world not to destroy men's lives, but to save them, causes Seventh-day Adventists to advocate a non-combatant position following their divine master in not taking human life, but, then I think it finishes, doing all you can to save life. I pulled this off of a blog, Adventist blog, a few weeks ago. It says, quote, if I knew my home church allowed people to carry concealed weapons, I'd change churches or stay home. The thought that someone sitting next to me in a church pew could be carrying a firearm and could decide to use it is terrifying. Now, does that sound like a Montana rancher? Probably not. No, but for some people, that would have been my position 25 years ago. And so this idea of taking out is foreign to how I was raised. So, posting an armed guard. There's a big divide in this nation over this topic, isn't there? Big divide, not just in the church, but in the nation. And each side has good studies, great articles they've written and arguments. So what's the truth? What's the truth? I think we have to go to this book, don't you? Because you can get every position and people can argue passionately on their position. And so I say this is the only place we can go to find the truth on this question, the Word of God. So that's where we're going to go. Now here's a prayer. Jesus taught us to pray this prayer. Give us this day our daily bread, Luke 11:3. If you pray that prayer in sincerity, will God answer that prayer for you? Yes. Yes. He wants to answer that prayer. We're to pray that prayer. So, here's the gentleman. He's praying this prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And he spends all day watching TV and playing video games. But he prays this prayer, I need my daily bread. And he has this Bible verse. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought for your life, what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor yet for your body, what you shall put on. Is not the life more than meat, and the body than raiment? Behold the fowls of the air, for they sow not, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, yet your heavenly Father feedeth them. Are you not much better than they? And this fella watching video games, he knows that he's better than a bird. And if God is going to take care of the birds and they don't have to work for it, then God's going to feed him. I mean, that's what the text says. But a misunderstanding of this Bible verse could cause someone to passively wait upon God to provide for his clothing and nourishment needs. And the fact is, we must take thought for our lives. We must toil and spin if we want to be clothed. We must sow, reap, and gather into barns if we want to eat. So what does this text mean? Here's what it means. Therefore I say unto you, take no thought, no anxious, troubled, or complaining thought. That's what Jesus is saying. You've got to take thought. You've got to sow. You've got to reap. You've got to do those things if you want to eat. But don't take complaining, anxious thought about this. God's going to take care of you. That's what it's about. For even when we were with you, this we commanded you, that if you would not work, neither should you eat. There is a part that we must play if we want to eat, right? Very clear. Now, here's that same text. Give us this day our daily bread. That's my wife Sharon on the tractor. And on our little property there in Helena, Montana, our backyard, we're praying this prayer. We want to eat, but we're going to do something about it. And so the ground there is so hard, we had to use that ripper on that tractor to tear up the soil. And then you can see the rototiller in my truck there. I then rototilled it, and I broke 25 shear pins on that. And not because of rocks, just the ground was so hard. But we're praying this prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And then we dug trenches, because I don't know if that soil would grow anything. So we dug trenches, still praying that prayer. Give us this day our daily bread. And then we filled those trenches with topsoil, with compost, and planted our garden. Give us this day our daily bread. Praying earnestly that prayer. And guess what? God answered our prayer. The sweetest carrots, the most juicy carrots we've ever eaten. We had such an abundance of produce, we had to give it to our neighbors. God answered our prayer for daily bread. Now, here's a prayer that this church should be praying. Keep me safe, Lord, from the hands of the wicked. Protect me from the violent, who devise ways to trip my feet. Psalms 140, verse 4. Will God answer that prayer? He wants to answer that prayer, doesn't he? Then why didn't God answer this prayer for the Sutherland Springs, Texas First Baptist Church there on November 5, 2017? Is it because they didn't pray that prayer hard enough? Why didn't God answer that prayer for them? We prayed to our God and posted a guard. Nehemiah 4:9. We prayed to our God and planted a garden. Do you see the connection there? We prayed to our God and posted a guard. It says, don't be afraid of them. This is Nehemiah. Don't be afraid of them. Remember the Lord. You got that? You see what Nehemiah is saying? He's saying, remember the Lord, who is great and awesome, and fight. Remember the Lord and fight. For your families, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your homes, those who carried materials, did their work with one hand on a weapon, and the other, each of the builders wore his sword at his side as he worked. You get the picture there? Now, here's a couple signs you could post in your foyer. One says, no weapons permitted. Love is the spirit of this church. Here's another sign you could post. Ministry safety team, trained and equipped to protect this church. We prayed to our God and posted a guard. Nehemiah 4:9. Now, if somebody who wanted to make the news and wanted to kill a large group of people walked into these two churches, which church do you think he would rather target? The gun-free zone, right? Yes. Just having a sign like this one posted would have a deterrent effect upon somebody who had wrong desires and purposes. This is the sign we have posted in the foyer of our church there in Helena. I think it's a smart sign to have. I think every church should post a sign like that. King David wrote in Psalms 46:1 that God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. And for David, this did not conflict with praising the God who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. Who was the one who brought Goliath down? It was God in reality, because it was God who caused that giant to throw his helmet back, and David was running. He had picked up 5 stones, and he was running towards the giant. But had David ever thrown a rock before? Yes. For years he had been training for this moment. He was prepared. He had his equipment, and he knew how to use his equipment. But it was God who helped that stone find its mark. We prayed to our God and posted a guard. God has a very significant part to play in everything. The horse is prepared against the day of battle. But safety, where's safety come from? We don't put our trust in the horses, do we? We don't put our trust in the armed guards. Where's our trust? The trust is in the Lord. But we do prepare the horse, do we not? We do plant the garden, do we not? But it's God who brings the sunshine. He causes the seed to grow. It's God who feeds me. But I have a little part to play. The doctrine of Scripture is that we prepare and work, and then we trust the outcome to God. God is not against the use of arms for self-defense. How do we know this? How do we know this? The porcupine can teach you that. Who put quills on the porcupine? God did. What if Mr. Porcupine decided to leave his den and leave his quills at home? What would happen when Mr. Wolf came along? He'd be a meal, wouldn't he? No. Nature itself teaches us that the means for self-defense is critically important because we live on a sinful world. Before sin, the porcupine, I don't know what the quills were for before then, but he didn't need them. No dog would have tried to get the porcupine before sin entered this world. God has given to Mrs. Skunk a powerful mace. And she protects herself, she protects her children from Mr. Fox. That fox will never do that again to this striped cat. He learned a valuable lesson. And who gave God that mace? Or who gave God who gave the skunk that mace? Who did it? God gave the skunk that mace. So is God against the use of arms for self-defense? Nature tells us the answer. What about this cuddly little bear? Wouldn't you love to go up and give him a hug? I would. But if she is defending her cubs, she's got 4-inch long razor-sharp claws. She's got sharp teeth. One swipe of the paw can take the head off of somebody who's trying to hurt her babies. She has the power to crush a skull. Who gave this bear these weapons? God did. God gave this bear this protection. Now, people and predators are going to think twice when they try to attack an elk or a moose. Why is that? Because of the antlers, right? Again, God is the one who gave these critters the means to protect themselves. Now, what about puny man? There he is. He has no claws. He has no fangs, no quills. He can't run real fast. He can't climb trees well. What is he going to do when the saber-toothed tiger comes? What is he going to do? Nothing he can do. He is an absolute defenseless, isn't he? Is that God's purpose, that only the human being would be defenseless and all the other creatures would have a means of defense? Well, God was the one who first posted an armed guard. Did you know that? Do you think an angel, just by an angel himself, could have kept people out of the garden? But what did God have that angel carry? A sword. A sword. And Adam probably thought, I see. I could make one of those. And then when the saber-toothed tiger comes after my sheep or myself, I can stop him. And so God gave humans a brain to be able to fashion their claws and their fangs and their means to defend themselves against those who would create harm to them. So he used a sword to block the access of Adam and Eve to the Garden of Eden. He stood with a sword to block the way of Balaam with his donkey. He appeared to Joshua as a military commander with a sword in his hand. In fact, the word sword appears over 400 times in the Old and New Testament. Is the Bible against the sword? No, the angels use them. Very clear. Like a muddied spring or a polluted fountain is a righteous man who gives way before the wicked, Proverbs 25:6. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. No, the Bible recognizes the need for the innocent to protect against the aggressor. For the minister of God, for he is the minister of God to thee for good. Now, who's this minister of God? For good. But if thou do that which is evil, be afraid. If somebody walks through that back door with evil intentions, he better be afraid. Why? For the minister beareth not the sword in vain. For he is the minister of God. Notice the emphasis Paul is giving here. This is the minister of God. Someone who's going to protect the innocent from the evil. A revenger to execute wrath upon him that doeth evil. Romans 13:4. Of course, you have this Bible verse here. Ye have heard that it had been said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him also the other. That's contrary to the takeout concept. That's the verse that this church in Lakewood uses, where we are a gun-free zone. That's Jesus speaking here. Here's another text. Do not repay anyone. Does that anyone include the active shooter? That's anyone. Evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. if it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friends, but leave room for God's wrath, for it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not overcome evil by evil, but overcome evil with good. That's an important text to consider in what we're discussing here. So, what would Jesus do? I'm going to give you a situation here, and we're going to see if we can understand what Jesus would do. 1 Samuel 11. About a month later, King Nahash of Ammon led his army against the Israelite city of Jabesh Gilead. But the citizens of Jabesh asked for peace. Make a treaty with us, and we will be your servants, they pleaded. All right, Nahash said, but only on one condition. I will gouge out the right eye of every one of you as a disgrace to all Israel. Give us 7 days to send messengers throughout Israel, replied the leaders of Jabesh. If none of our relatives will come to save us, we will agree to your terms. When the messengers came to Gibeah, Saul's hometown, and told the people about their plight, everyone broke into tears. Now, what would Jesus do? But I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on the right cheek, turn to him also your left. Isn't that what Jesus said? That's what Jesus said. Based upon the popular understanding of this text, we would send the messenger back with this message. Men, women, and children of Jabesh, do not resist evil, but rather offer the enemy your left eyes also, and we'll stay here and weep for you. Come on, really? Is that what Jesus would do? I mean, that's following the text, is it not? What did Jesus, in fact, inspire Saul to do? 1 Samuel says, Saul was plowing in the field, and when he returned to town, he asked, "What's the matter? Why is everyone crying?" So they told him about the message from Jabesh. Then the Spirit of God came mightily upon Saul. What came upon Saul? Spirit of God came upon him, and he became very angry. That's righteous indignation. He took 2 oxen and cut them into pieces and sent the messengers to carry them throughout Israel with this message. This is what will happen to the oxen of everyone who refuses to follow Saul and Samuel into battle. And that made the people afraid of Saul's anger, and all of them came out together as one. When Saul mobilized them at Bezek, he found that there were 300,000 men of Israel in addition to 30,000 from Judah. So Saul sent the messengers back to Jabesh Gilead to say, "We will rescue you by noontime tomorrow." What joy there was throughout the city when the message arrived. The men of Jabesh then told their enemies, "Tomorrow we will come out to you." Okay, that's what they said. Tomorrow we're going to come out to you. But before dawn the next morning, Saul arrived. Having divided his army into 3 detachments, he launched a surprise attack against the Ammonites and slaughtered them the whole morning. The remnant of the army was so badly scattered that no 2 of them were left together. Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. The Spirit of God is the one who inspired this deliverance, right? Another situation, what would Jesus do? The victorious invaders then plundered Sodom and Gomorrah and began their long journey home, taking all the wealth and food with them. They also captured Lot, Abram's nephew, who lived in Sodom, and took everything he owned. One of the men who escaped came and told Abram, the Hebrew, who was camped at the oak grove belonging to Mamre the Amorite. So, what would Jesus do? But I say unto you, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. In other words, Abram, sit tight and pray for those marauding thieves. Think of some way you can bless them and do something nice for them. Do you really think that's what Jesus would tell them to do? What did Jesus tell Abram to do? When Abram learned that Lot had been captured, he called together the men born in his household, 313 of them in all. He chased after Chedorlaomer's army until he caught up with them in Dan. There he divided his men and attacked during the night from several directions. Chedorlaomer's army fled, but Abram chased them to Horeb, north of Damascus. Abram and his allies recovered everything, the goods that had been taken, and Abram's nephew and his possessions, and all the women and other captives as Abram returned from his victory over Chedorlaomer and his allies. The king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Sheva, that is the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, the king of Salem and the priest of God Most High, brought him bread and wine. Melchizedek blessed Abram with this blessing. Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who had helped you overcome your enemies or destroy your enemies, okay? Then Abram gave Melchizedek a tenth of all the goods he had recovered. Again, Jesus is the same. Same Jesus in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So what do we do with this text in Matthew 5:39 that tells us to turn the other cheek? Well, a slap on the right cheek is very different from a slash to the right jugular. If insulted, ridiculed, denounced, we should not retaliate. That is what Jesus is teaching. Self-defense from deadly force is not being addressed in this passage. You do not offer your left jugular. A woman ran into a local church for protection from an attacker. The pastor hid her in a back room and then came out and tried to reason with the assailant. The man didn't want to listen, however, and opened fire. Shot in the hand, the pastor ran to his office and slammed the door shut. The gunman broke through that door, at which time the pastor shot him between the eyes, killing him instantly. Why would a pastor be carrying a weapon of self-defense? How did that happen? Well, maybe the reason why the pastor was carrying a weapon of self-defense is because nature itself taught him that he needed to have a means to protect against an evil force. And perhaps it has something to do with what Jesus commanded in Luke 22:36. Then said he unto them, but now he that hath a purse, let him take it, and likewise his scrip. And he that hath no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. Now, when you read the Bible, you're to take the plain reading of the Scripture. If you can't take the plain reading, like if you read something that says a leopard came out of the water with 4 heads and wings, and you say, well, that has to be symbolic. I can't take that literally. So then you see it symbolically. But first you must try to understand it literally. And you should never symbolize something that is supposed to be taken literal. Okay? Not to make the Scripture mystical. And we know that a purse is literal. Jesus was talking about you need to take a money bag when you travel. That's reasonable, isn't it? And the scrip, that's a backpack. So he can carry his sleeping bag and food and whatever he needed. That's literal. And the sword, that was literal. He's talking about. He's not talking about the sword of the Spirit. He's talking about an instrument, a protection against thieves and robbers and those who would cause harm. Because he made this statement for us for a reason. He knew what he had said on the Sermon on the Mountain about turning the other cheek and about blessing. He didn't want us to misunderstand what he was teaching there. That has nothing to do with stopping an aggressor from harming the innocent people. That all has to do with how we deal with insult and ridicule and that kind of persecution, not physical harm. Physical harm, the the guy who's shooting and hurting other people must be stopped, must be taken out, just as Adventist risk management is teaching us. And so we would read this scripture just as it reads. That's how God intended, how Jesus intended us to understand it. So how do we decide if Jesus meant what he said here, or he was speaking metaphorically? If the Bible promotes pacifism, then we know that Jesus did not mean what he said. If, however, the Bible does not teach pacifism, then we should take his word as they read and purchase the means for self-defense. But what about this verse? Then said Jesus unto him, Put up again thy sword in his place. For all that take the sword shall perish with the sword. Have you heard that text before? There you have it. Isn't Jesus against the sword? I mean, he just told us to buy one, right? Sell a jacket. And what's going on in this verse? First of all, I want you to notice that Jesus did not tell Peter, throw that sword in the trash bin. You have no need for that. What did he say? Put it back in its holster. That's what he told him. You have to know the context of what was happening here. John 18:3 tells us that there was a detachment of soldiers that came to arrest Jesus. You know what Roman soldiers, how they're dressed? Have you seen pictures of them? They've got shields, they've got spears, they're trained. And you've got a big detachment of these guys. And Peter rashly and impulsively pulled a sword out. If it wasn't for Jesus' protection, his head would have rolled just like that, and the next second he would have been dead. That was a rash thing for Peter to do. He wasn't thinking clearly. And he pulled a weapon on the federal government. You don't do that. No, we are not to use a sword against government officers or soldiers. Those who draw a sword against duly authorized officials will perish with the sword. Peter's actions were completely out of place. If what Jesus said, for all that take the sword will perish with the sword, meant a death sentence for anyone who bears a sword, then you have Jesus saying that those who serve as policemen are sentenced to death. That cannot be. God calls those who bear the sword to execute his wrath on evildoers, what does he call them? Ministers of God. The Bible teaches us that there is a legitimate use for the sword. And there's an illegitimate use of the sword. Revelation 13:10, he that leadeth into captivity shall go into captivity. He that killeth with a sword must be killed with a sword. There was a lot of persecution by the Jews of Christians, was there not? They were using the sword illegally, were they not? Yes, they were. And what happened to them in 70 A.D.? All who use the sword, killeth with the sword, must be killed with the sword. It's an illegal use of the sword that Jesus is referring to here. And the Waldenses understood what Jesus was saying here. Listen to this. The Waldenses, their humble supplication for peace, having been contemptuously rejected, as we have already said, had three courses in their course: to go to Mass, to be butchered as sheep, or to fight for their lives. They chose the last and made ready for battle. The Waldenses interpreted this as an interposition of providence on their behalf. If it had been given them the power, it had been given them the power of repelling the invader, climbing the hills of Pra, I think that's what it says there. There. Issuing from all their hiding places in its environs, they spread themselves over the mountains, the paths of which they were familiar to them. And while the host stood riveted beneath them, caught in the double toils of the defile in the midst, they tore up huge stones and rocks, sent them thundering down. Take out, right? That's what we're told. Take out. They were doing what Adventist risk management says to do. They were taking these people who were coming up to murder and to rape. And it was totally a misuse of what these guys were doing. The papal soldiers were crushed where they stood, nor was this all. Some of the Waldenses boldly entered the chasm, sword in hand, and attacked them in front. This was the church of God, was it not? The one that fled into the wilderness. This was God's true people, true church. They understood what Jesus had said about swords. They had a clear knowledge of that. Theologians J.P. Moreland and Norman Geisler say, Gisler says, to permit murder when one could have prevented it is morally wrong. To allow a rape when one could have hindered it is an evil. To watch an act of cruelty to children without trying to intervene is morally inexcusable. In brief, not resisting evil is an evil of omission, and an evil of omission can be just as evil as an evil of commission. Any man who refuses to protect his wife and children against a violent intruder fails them morally. Self-defense may actually result in one of the greatest examples of human love. Christ himself said, greater love has no one than this, that he lay down his life for his friends. When protecting one's family or neighbors, a Christian is unselfishly risking his own life for the sake of others. Courts have held that the government has no responsibility to provide individual security. One case put it this way: there is no constitutional right to be protected by the state against being murdered. Did you know that? The police are not there to protect you from getting murdered. That's not their job. Why? Because they're not there when you're getting murdered, right? They're not going to be there. So they can't protect you. Their job is to come in afterwards and prosecute and try to find out who did what and, clean up the mess. But no, you've got to take your quills with you if you want to be protected from the wolf, because the police are not going to be there. The right to personal self-defense is a biblical doctrine. While Christians are authorized to defend their families, there is no biblical basis for personal revenge, hatred, or political persuasion by the means of arms. Christianity was never meant to be spread by the means of the sword. And while we do have a right to self-defense, we must decide when it is proper to use it. Difficult choices exist in this evil world, and I hope that I never have to defend my family, my church, or my neighbor from a violent attack. Now, there's a lady by the name of Ellen White back in the 1800s who helped to found this Seventh-day Adventist church. This Seventh-day Adventist church, which is a peace church. It's a pacifist church. So you would think that this writer, this person, this founder, would be a pacifist, would you not? Well, and let me tell you something about how respected this lady is. There was a survey done, and to find out who was the most influential on pastors, writers. In a remarkable report, the Barna Group, a nationally recognized polling survey organization, recently declared Ellen White to be one of the most influential authors among a cross-section of young pastors in the United States. They surveyed all pastors of all denominations, and this is what they found. Surveyed pastors under 40 years of age listed her as one of the top authors that impacted them personally in the last 3 years. Pretty amazing, right? Well, are you interested to see what she had to say on this? Are you ready? We have to be very well armed. In passing through the Indian Territory, we have our wagons brought up in a circle. Then our horses are placed within the circle. We have 2 men to watch. They're relieved every 2 hours. They carry their guns upon their shoulders. We have less fears from the Indians than from the white men who employ the Indians to make stampede among the horses and mules and ponies. What did she say about arms? What? We have to be well armed. We have to have quills that are sharp. We need claws that are capable of stopping aggression. Now, this is her comment on Abraham and what happened there with Lot. Notice this. Seeking first of all divine counsel. So what did Abraham first do? Went to the Lord. Abraham prepared for war. Well, I thought war was bad. I don't like war. Do you like war? No. But is there a just war? Let's find out. Abraham prepared for what? For war. From his own encampment, he summoned 318 trained servants, men trained in the fear of God, in the service of their master, and in the practice of arms. The patriarch divided his forces as to approach from different directions, then came upon the encampment by night. His attack, so vigorous and unexpected, resulted in speedy victory. The king of Elam was slain, and his panic-stricken forces were utterly routed. Lot and his family, with all that were recovered, and a rich booty fell into the hands of the victors. To Abraham, under God, the triumph was due. The worshiper of Jehovah had not only rendered a great service to the country, but had proved himself a man of valor. It was seen that righteousness is not cowardice, and that Abraham's religion made him courageous in maintaining the right and defending the oppressed. His heroic act gave him a widespread influence among the surrounding tribes. Patriarchs and Prophets 134. Abraham prepared for war. And she says in that same book, 308, the eighth commandment condemns man-stealing and slave-dealing and forbids wars of what? Wars of conquest. Was Abraham's war a war of conquest? No. It was one of defense, protecting the innocent from the aggressor. Listen to this. You'll like this one. Clergymen, pastors, clergymen, and it is said even the police advise men and women to carry firearms for their own protection. For the past 3 months, San Francisco, this is written in 1907, past 3 months, San Francisco has been living under a reign of terror. I want you to remember that term, reign of terror. In 80 days, 83 murders, robberies, and assaults were registered on the police records. That's about one a day. This is a reign of terror. One a day. Today, there are 16 a day of these three events in San Francisco and 78 a day in Chicago. And the fact is, every 23.6 seconds, there is a violent crime committed in the United States. That's 24 hours, 7 days a week, 365 days. Every how long? 23.6 seconds. A violent crime, we're talking about rape, murder, robbery, is committed. Are we sort of in a reign of terror? Living? Yes. And Ellen White said this is what in her day, one a day was considered a reign of terror. And that's what they needed to do. They needed to get protection. In this magazine, our newspaper, and weekly periodical reports the sale in San Francisco during 1 week in October of over 6,000 revolvers. The police have said and are powerless to preserve order and protect the city, in the opinion of the best citizens of San Francisco, because the heads of the force are corrupt and are doing the will of a corrupt political society. So that's what was happening there in 1907. Here's what she says here. Our provisions have been very low for some days. Many of our supplies have gone. We expected supplies 3 days ago, certainly, but none has come. Willie went to the lake for water. That's her son. Willie was Ellen White and James White's son. We heard his gun and found he had shot 2 ducks. This is really a blessing, for we were in need of something to live on. So do you think the Whites had a gun? A few days you now have together, Ellen White's writing to her husband, James White. She says, improve these days, roam about, camp out, fish and hunt. Interesting. Go to places that you have not seen. Rest as you go and enjoy everything. Then come back to your work refreshed and vigorous. Have you read these statements before? Yesterday eve, 200 Indians passed through. 5 horses of Mr. Walling's were missing, also his cows. It was thought that the Indians might have stolen the horses. Mr. Walling threw off his coat, armed himself with 2 revolvers and a bowie knife, and in company with one of his men started on horseback to find the horses. Let's look at one more here. A mob of 25 men on horseback called at the school and sent the white teacher, one of Edson's, that's one of her sons, Edson's men, out of town on a rail, nailed the doors and windows shut, and burned books and maps and charts in the schoolyard. Then they found one of the leading black believers in the area, N.W. Olivan, and thrashed him with a buggy whip, stopping only when commanded to do so by a white man who brandished a revolver. It stopped the aggression. Here's a picture, a painting. You have early Americans heading for church with their Bibles and rifles in arms. Why would these men be going to church with rifles? Well, I think it has something to do with this thought here in Adventist Home. It says, the Lord has constituted the husband, the head of the wife, to be her protector. So who's the protector? Husband. But if any provide not for his own, this is from Timothy, not for his own, and especially for those of his own house, he hath denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. Now, these men walking to church, they don't want to be worse than an infidel, do they not? They're providing for their families. You see clothes on the back of their wives and children, don't you? They have a shelter at home. They're providing for their family. They also have to provide protection, do they not? Yes. If you do not provide protection for your family, you are worse than an infidel, according to what Paul is saying here. So these men, early Americans, did not want to be infidels. And so that's why they took their rifles with them to church. Out in the foyer, you'd see all the guns lined up because they never knew when there might be an attack from people who wanted to do them harm. So they knew what the Bible taught, didn't they? Very biblical. So, posting an armed guard. What do you think? What's the Bible? What is the Bible teaching us here? And why do we want to post an armed guard? There are wolves, are there not? What does the wolf have in his mouth? A set of very sharp teeth. And his purpose is to come into the flock and kill sheep. That's what he wants to do. So, what are we going to do if we have wolves out there? What should the farmer do, or the rancher, or the shepherd do to protect his flock? I would say he should put up wolf-free zone signs, right? Don't you think that would help? Or do you think that's a dumb idea? I don't think it's really a bright idea, because the wolves don't care about signs, do they? Not at all. Now, they're going to want to get the sheep. They want to make sure there's no sheepdogs around. But the shepherd, if he was smart, he would train a sheepdog. This is a picture of a sheepdog. Do you see anything similar to a wolf? Now, do the sheep like sheepdogs? Not really. They remind them of bad wolves, don't they? And so sheepdogs are like that fella that said, I'm terrified to think that there's a sheepdog here who might have teeth to stop a wolf. That just terrifies me. Well, the sheep are also terrified of sheepdogs, but they're very happy when a wolf comes along. They're so thankful. You see, it says here, the only way to stop a bad guy with fangs is with a good guy with fangs. Now, I made that one. I took that from another popular saying, if you've seen that saying before. But that's a picture of a wolf. There is your sheepdog and there's your wolf. And you notice they're both equally armed, aren't they? The only way to take out a wolf is what? With what? A sheepdog. Somebody who can protect the sheep. Would a sheepdog ever hurt a lamb? Never hurt a lamb. He is there to provide protection. These lambs are so innocent. They're so cuddly. they can't protect themselves, can they? Don't you just love sheep? I grew up with sheep. You know, they're just such wonderful little animals. They don't hurt anybody. Now, if sheep look like this, they wouldn't need a sheepdog, would they? Do you think a wolf would come attack a flock of sheep who look like this? No, not at all. And so God did not give the sheep fangs, so he gave the sheep sheepdogs to protect the sheep. And there's the sheepdog doing his job. There he is, right there, on duty, right there in the midst of the sheep, ready to protect from a wolf. And the sheep feel safe and secure because a sheepdog is on duty. There he is, magnificent. He has a concealed weapon, doesn't he? He keeps his teeth concealed until the point where there's a wolf who comes into the flock. And then he draws out his fangs and takes care of the wolf. And the wolf goes running, and the sheep are saved. So, posting an armed guard. Oh, there it is with the question mark. Okay, there's where it is. Apple. Okay. This is an important sign here. Do you see what this guy is doing? There's a bear who wants to eat the sheep. And he has his rod, he has his staff, he has his weapon to keep the bear at distance. Now, this is coming from the website of the Adventist Risk Management. It says, the rise in deadly shootings in public places has many congregations considering the use of armed security at their church, as well as members and visitors wanting to bring their firearms to church for protection. That's what's on their website. I know my congregation just struggles to make their budget. We can't even afford somebody to clean the church. Do you think we could afford armed security? No. Maybe a big church can do that, but most of the little small churches cannot afford armed security. And it says members and visitors are wanting to bring. You have no idea how many sheepdogs are here in this building right now. You don't know. Because sheepdogs don't reveal themselves unless a wolf came in. And so a true sheepdog, a person who believes that it's their God-given duty and right to protect themselves and their family from evil, they wouldn't leave their home without their quills. They have the means to protect themselves. They're a sheepdog. Whether it's, I know pastors who wouldn't go into a pulpit without having the means to protect their congregation if somebody bad came in. So that's the nature of how we're living, because every 23.6 seconds, and sin is only getting worse. Crime is only going to get worse. And so that's why we've got to go to the Word of God to see what we're supposed to do regarding this kind of issue. They say here, if armed security is used, it should be contracted from a professional security provider. Do not allow untrained, unprofessional, armed church members to provide security during the church services. That's so important. There should never be an untrained, somebody who works in an unprofessional manner. A sheepdog, would a shepherd ever have a sheepdog who's not trained? No, the sheepdog would probably eat the sheep, wouldn't it? No, the sheepdog has to be well trained. If a pastor knowingly allows a church member to carry a weapon into the church for the purpose of providing armed security, this individual may be held to be an agent of the local church and conference. The actions taken by this individual could cause the conference liability for negligence and civil damages. Further, the loss of life or injury caused by an error in using the firearm may raise criminal prosecution for those involved. This is on their website. This is important to realize. But you also need to know that according to the picture up there, in many of our churches, maybe not in California, but certainly in Montana and other states, there are sheepdogs in every congregation. I've pastored for 24 years, and in almost every church I've pastored, I was aware that there were sheepdogs. But don't tell me you're a sheepdog. See, pastor isn't knowing is not to know that. Okay, it should be noted that a general liability insurance policy provided by Adventist Risk Management excludes coverage for the use of firearms. This means that the use of firearm by either an employee or a volunteer in the course of their duties will not be covered, basically. Does the individual who, this is all from the Adventist Risk Management website, does the individual who may be willing to provide armed security for the congregation have the proper license or concealed weapons permit and firearm liability insurance? This is very important what our church is teaching here, telling us here. And of course, the context here is paid professional, but it would apply to anybody. You should never carry a weapon without proper permits. And you should never do that unless you have firearm liability insurance. And it's easy to get. The United States Concealed Carry Association, an excellent place to get that insurance, and I wouldn't carry without that. The back of this card tells you what to do if there's an incident. Very important. Should you ask permission? If you live in a state where churches are not off limits, and assuming your church doesn't outwardly prohibit it, should you ask permission? No, you shouldn't ask. But it may be a good idea to ask if there's a security team in place or volunteer to start one. No, concealed carry means you don't know who the sheepdogs are. You should never feel obligated to ask permission to carry your firearm anywhere you have a legal right to have it. With that said, it is common for churches to form a security team of volunteers who are positioned, organized, and often trained to respond to an emergency. Your contribution to your own security and that of others will be far greater if you're part of that organized response. I took last year. I took a whole day of training in security for churches by a professional team who came there in Portland and put on this program. What to do in churches if there's an active shooter. And here on January 30, just a few days, this next week, there's another training event. And it's free. This is free. You can get even CPE credits for it. And so you can go to this website and register and take this training. We should not have untrained sheepdogs. Sheepdogs should all be trained. Of course, I'm looking for that day when this will not be necessary. Porcupines won't have to have quills. The lion will lay down with the lamb. No sheepdogs necessary anymore. Aren't you looking forward to that day? I am. But we're today living in the land of the enemy, and so we have to do something. Now, I would like to call up one of my elders here from the Helena Church, and Jonathan Webster. This is a picture a few months ago, right?
Yep, just a few months ago.
Veterans Day.
That's right.
That's why Jonathan had his suit on. What do you call it? The uniform.
Uniform.
Your
That's
uniform on, because it was Veterans Day, and he was being ordained as an elder in our church. So he's an elder in our church. Now, Jonathan, you're going to share some practical aspects of what we've been talking about. Now, first of all, so the folk know who you are. I know he's a pilot, and a good pilot. He flew us over from Helena here on Friday. But I want you to tell them a little of your background. What have you been educated in? What field of training have you?
Well, prior to being a professional pilot, I was a flight instructor. I spent a lot of time working as a pilot. We spent a lot of time on risk management and dealing with threats in various situations. And prior to that, I served in the Marine Corps. I was deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. I was a weapons safety instructor, and I served on the marksmanship training unit in the 11th Marines Regiment.
Very good. Now tell me any other training you've had, education.
I have a bachelor's degree.
Bachelor's degree?
Bachelor's degree in aviation management.
From?
From Walla Walla University.
Okay, all right.
And a master's in business administration from American Military University.
Very good. Okay, MBA. Now, any other kind of training that qualifies you to teach, train?
Let's see. Well, not off the top of my head, but...
Are you not a physical trainer?
Oh, I am a personal trainer, a
Oh.
NASM certified personal trainer with some other specializations there.
Okay.
And I also fired expert 3 times on the rifle range while I was in the Marine Corps.
Very good. Okay, excellent. Now, you're going to share with us some aspects of what we can do to make our churches safer. Because on March 24, in North American Division, we're supposed to, every church is supposed to have a, what do they call it? Safety Sabbath. It's Safety Sabbath. And they want you to do either a fire drill or an active shooter. That's what they're really encouraging. Do an active shooter drill in church on that date. Okay, Jonathan, share with us.
All right. Well, I'm going to share a little bit on a specific scenario, that active shooter scenario that we were just talking about. Later this afternoon, we're going to get a lot more in-depth information on security, church security, and I'm really looking forward to that presentation. But before we get there, we're going to be talking about the active shooter and what we can do in that situation. Grab my little clicker here. I am hoping that my slides didn't get too reorganized.
And the clicker may have to be
The clicker's
turned
not
on.
turned on. I got it. There's
Got
a
it?
switch on the side.
Okay.
There it is. Okay. And if it's actuated, we'll see. It's on, but it's not working.
Okay.
Oh, it changed. It went quite a few slides
Yeah,
here.
just go back. You haven't been trained in this. use of this,
Apparently, you should have trained me on that one. Oh, I see what happened.
Yeah,
No, I got it.
got it. Okay. See if that's going to work.
When you add 3 presentations together and then convert them into Apple, apparently some weird things happen.
That's right.
Okay, so today we're going to talk about the worst day. Is it clicking now? It's still not clicking, by the way.
You'll have to touch the
I just
screen.
touch the screen. Well, that's going to limit my movement a little bit, but we'll work with it. So what do we know? Life can be scary. Got to change a setting here. So if you look for danger, you'll often find it, and therefore maybe we should just hide inside and we'll just wait it all out, right? Wrong. So we have the Great Commission, and he said to them, "Go into all the world and preach the gospel to all creation." So this Great Commission, it's necessary for us to spread the gospel to the whole world. And fulfilling this will bring negative attention. Whenever you stand for truth throughout history, any group that stood for truth and promoted the righteous way to live your life, they've gotten a backlash from that. So we know that from Scripture and from our own experience and from history. But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you are blessed. And do not be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. So since staying home is not an option, and since we are compelled to go out into the world, what can we do to protect ourselves and others from danger? So we're going to talk about a couple of churches. We've mentioned these, Pastor Witcombe mentioned these churches, these incidents earlier in his presentation, but we're going to look a little more in depth on these 2 incidents. So the New Life Church on December 9th, 2007, the incident occurred just after 1 p.m., and an article from the Denver 7 News posted the day after the event recounts some of the details. So 2 church members were shot to death and 3 others were injured after a gunman opened fire outside the New Life Church in Colorado Springs as Sunday services were wrapping up. The gunman was shot by a female church security officer and was found dead when police arrived at the scene. The gunman was stopped about 4 minutes after he started. First Baptist Church, November 5th, 2017. The shooting began around 11:30 a.m. at the First Baptist Church of Sutherland Springs. 26 people were killed and 20 wounded. The shooting began in the parking lot and continued when the gunman entered the building. And as the gunman exited the church, he was engaged by an armed civilian and was chased from the scene. The gunman was found dead later, approximately 5 miles from the scene. So what can we learn from these two incidents? So there are some similarities. Both of these occurred at a church, the near at worship time. There are similar weapons used in both incidents. They both used semi-automatic rifles, magazine-fed weapons. Both gunmen were in their 20s. Some differences between those two attacks are the number of casualties and the duration of the attack. So at the time of the attack, an estimated 7,000 persons were on the campus of the New Life Church. We can compare that to the First Baptist Church, which is located in a town of 600. So why is this such a different result? You would think that the church with the larger congregation would have suffered more casualties. There's plenty more targets for a gunman to take out. So why is it that they had so much fewer? And the reason is preparation. So preparation is the difference. So preparation is a definition, it's defined as a state of readiness, properly expectant, organized, or equipped. So let's talk about some examples of preparedness. A real common one is fire preparedness, which has resulted in a nearly 20% decline in fires from 2006 to 2015, according to the U.S. Fire Administration. This is in part to safety equipment like fire extinguishers, fire alarms, and sprinklers, but also in part to awareness and preparedness in the general population. And I was trying to think when I was thinking about fire for this slide, I was trying to remember how many fire drills I've been in my entire life and how many actual fires I've been in, and how many buildings like churches or schools or workplaces that I've been that have actually been on fire. And I would say that the drills far outweigh the actual events of fire that I've been in. So let's talk about some other preparedness examples. We have tornado shelters. I don't know if you get tornadoes here much in Miles City. Not really. We don't get many in Helena either, but for those of you watching at home, you might be in an area where tornadoes are a problem. So we have shelters that we can hide in to protect ourselves. Anybody have an idea what this preparedness is about? Earthquake, right. We recognize this one. Sometimes we get a few we've had a couple of earthquakes in Helena, actually. I didn't expect that moving there. I'm not used to the Rocky Mountains having earthquakes, but I guess they got there somehow, didn't they? So this is kind of a neat one. This is from Japan, and this gentleman sitting inside his creation there. It's a protective ball for tsunami or earthquake events. People can take shelter inside this ball. They're, I guess, virtually indestructible. They're a really strong structure that you can hide inside and weather an event. So how does one go about getting prepared? Well, we're going to learn a lot more about that later this afternoon, but I'm just going to touch on it a little bit. So you want to expect the events, and you have to organize and equip for the event. So an example I thought of was the Boy Scouts. Their motto is be prepared. So Boy Scouts engage in activities like camping. So with camping, what kind of risks do we have? We have rain, we have bugs, we want to start a fire. So to be able to do that, we need to bring things to start fires. We have bug repellent, rain jackets, tents. So we prepare for carrying out our mission. So what are we trying to accomplish, as well as for things that may go wrong. So we call these things that go wrong risks. Every activity carries with it some risk, some element of risk. Some activities have more risks than others. Petting zoos aren't particularly risky endeavors. And some risks are a little more obvious than others. So risks can, should, and have been evaluated as well as reevaluated over time. Experts have taken a look at various challenges facing various groups of people, and we can do the same thing to figure out what it is that we need to do. So the risk assessment matrix is a tool for evaluating risks. Pilots use a version of this, a risk assessment matrix, when we plan for our flights. So using this matrix, we can classify threats against the organization, and we can prioritize our preparation activities based on the time and resources available. So the preparation activities like purchasing equipment, running drills, publishing manuals, posting notices, or recruiting volunteers. And the matrix, another thing that's beneficial is that it forces us to do a reality check. Even if the probability of an event occurring is low, the severity, that is the severity of the event, may dictate us taking some kind of action to mitigate that risk. So let's go ahead and apply this matrix. As discussed before, there is a growing number of church shootings occurring across the world. Reasons for this trend include secularism's degrading effect on culture and the resulting breakdown of social fabric, growing threats from Islamic extremism, anti-religious or anti-Christian sentiment. The reasons are not really our focus today. The point is that this danger is present and it's on the rise. The improbable may be at least becoming probable, and without any preparation, an attack such as the one that so recently occurred in Sutherland Springs, Texas, would wipe out essentially my entire congregation. So I'd consider that to be a pretty catastrophic event. And that's why we have decided to prepare, and I believe that's why you're here today. So we'll briefly talk about a couple types of preparation. The first is mental preparation, and the second is physical preparation. And once again, I'm going to keep my preparation talk a little more narrowed to the active shooter event. So a mindset is a thought or attitude that enhances your survivability. God won't allow it to happen. So with this mindset, an individual puts up a barrier against reality. If you do not believe your car is capable of sliding, you will not be able to accept when your car loses traction on the icy roads. So the reality is, it can happen. And if it does happen, I will act. This is a decision you have to make beforehand, because you're not going to have time to make it in the moment. So a mindset is about being mindful, not fearful. Safety is about awareness, and we're being proactive against danger. So I have a couple of quotes here that I like as far as that kind of go with my mindset and my mental preparation, and that hope is not a course of action. You can have hope, and you should have hope. We have lots of reasons to have hope, that Great Commission I talked about earlier, but hope alone is not a course of action. And the other is si vis pacem para bellum, and that's a Latin phrase that translates, if you want peace, prepare for war. So I need to make a correction from Pastor Witcombe's presentation. So we've been referring to these gunmen as active shooters, when they should really be called what they are, active killers. Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman insists that this distinction is important, and I agree. As the incident is occurring, police and even some of the victims may also be actively shooting. Only the intruder is the one actively trying to kill. Cover. Cover is a material that will stop bullets. Anyone have a suggestion or what could be used as cover? Brick walls? Pews? Maybe. Depends. So really the question should have been, cover from what? So it depends on the type of firearm being used. Pistols have a much lower penetration than rifles do. This piano up here, majority of that piano would be effective cover against quite a few small arms, unlike that piano over there, which would not be very much cover at all. Concealment. Concealment is a material or object that will hide you from view, but it does not provide ballistic protection, such as like a curtain or drywall. You might think that drywall will stop something, but it will not. So a soft target. A soft target is a person or location that is relatively unprotected. You heard Pastor Witcombe mention soft targets before and how many churches are considered soft targets. Gun-free school zones are often considered soft targets as well. Lockout, another term to remember. So keep the killer outside. Many of these shootings start in the parking lot. Both of the shootings that I referred to, they started in the parking lot. So if it's possible to deny the killer access by locking them out, we should do so. Lock down. So the killer's already inside. So if we lock our interior rooms or we shelter in place, that would be considered a lockdown, hiding somewhere. Fatal funnels. So fatal funnels are areas such as hallways or doorways which prevent side-to-side movement. An example that we'll talk a little bit more about later is Carl Chin at the New Life Church when he was actually, he wrote that book that the pastor mentioned, and I'll talk about it later, but Carl Chin engaged the shooter at the New Life Church as he came into the front entrance in the hallway. He didn't kill the shooter, but the shooter took cover in the hallway, and his movement was limited. And he was held in place long enough that the female security officer was able to engage the shooter from the side and eliminate the threat. So a unification point. So think of a fire drill. Whenever we have a fire drill, we have some sort of rally point outside, because when everybody gets out, we want to make sure everyone got out, and the only way we'll know that is if they don't scatter to the four winds. They're going to have to all regroup and rally at some point. But at a fire drill, we're just trying to get out of the building. Now, an active shooter event, we're going to want that rally point to be a little farther away, somewhere where we know is safe, so that we're not just gathering up for an easier target. So understanding the gunman, another part of mental preparation. So as I mentioned before, these are not shooters. They're active killers, and they're also typically lone gunmen. They're looking to kill as many people as possible, and they often do not stop until met by force, and that force can either come from a civilian, one of the victims of the incident, or from police. So it's not entirely clear where these individuals are coming from. Usually only after the incident can the authorities and the investigators draw the line back to where these gunmen come from. And the last thing I want you to remember is that they are cowards. They don't go after easy targets because they're brave. They don't go after easy targets because they're strong. They're weak, they're cowards, they're crooks. And only a coward would seek to fulfill their rage by seeking out these groups of innocents to slaughter. Kind of that pick on someone your own size, and they're not going to do that because they're cowards. I have to reiterate that because I just want to make sure that we get that understanding. Because when the media promotes these individuals, that's what they're looking for. They want that infamy. And if we change our mindset and the mindset of those around us, they're not going to get what they're looking for, and they're going to have to go look somewhere else. So physical preparation. A couple of thoughts on the physical preparation for an active shooter event, active killer event. So personal preparation like fitness. So how fast can you run? I can run pretty fast. I did a lot of running in the Marine Corps, but sometimes it's easier to, especially when it's cold outside, to not go keep up the training. But then I just remember why I'm training, and that gives me the motivation I need to. So could you break a window? And could you crawl along the ground if the situation required it? Did you think all those recruits in military training learned to crawl for the fun of it? So getting low is a great way to get out of harm's way. How you dress can also dictate your capabilities. So men have the upper hand in the footwear department. And I know, ladies, those heels look cute, but how fast can you move? And are you willing to ditch those heels and run barefoot if you need to? There's a lot of ice and snow outside. I wouldn't really prefer to run barefoot, but to each their own. And this is my favorite. Nothing says, I'm not willing to do anything physical today, like a pair of flip-flops. So other physical preparation considerations include the building, such as your church, and structural hardening, which we'll look at in the next couple slides. So this is a picture of the inside of a small church, probably similar to the size of the First Baptist Church, and actually not much different in size than the one we're in today. You got pews, got an entrance over here. We have the podium up front. There's an organ, a piano, and just kind of the standard church stuff. Now a view from the front to the back. So this podium here is a little bit different than the one I'm standing in front of today. So this one could be upgraded with some bullet-resistant material. We could probably hide that inside the podium, and what that would do is give a defensible position for whoever the speaker was. As pointed out before, the gunman often comes in, and the person up front speaking is the first target. So if we can frustrate their attempts to attack the speaker, we can slow them down and give ourselves more time to react, give the body more time to react. So in the back of the entrance, in this back of the sanctuary in this picture, there's some double doors, just like kind of like the ones we have here. These ones in this picture, though, only open out into the foyer. So they can only open one way, which means that, and they're usually closed during the sanctuary or during the service, or at least they should be. And what that is that's one more barrier, one more thing that someone would have to go through to get into the sanctuary. They have to physically open that door. And in an active killer incident, seconds count, and they can make all the difference. So let's say it happens. So the evil came knocking, and this time it brought a gun. Bullets are starting to fly, so what now? Well, what now depends on you, and there are a few things that will happen, which we're going to discuss, but the outcome is ultimately in your hands. In 2013, the FBI found that 70% of the incidents it reviewed were finished in 5 minutes or less. Now, in a really small town, that might be enough time for law enforcement to arrive, but in most cases, law enforcement isn't going to have time to get there. So everyone's first priority should be to evacuate. So if you can get away, do so. The best defense is not to be there. So the next is hide, which includes the lockout from earlier. So if you can, deny the killer access. Any delay that frustrates the killer's purpose is time on your side. Do not comply with the active killer. There have been numerous, and it's astonishing to me. I mean, I can't judge because I wasn't there, but there have been numerous shootings where the victims pleaded with their murderer while ultimately waiting for their turn to die, just walking down the line and killing each one of them, and they did nothing. You need to remember that your life is in your hands. Do not be a victim. So if you have to fight, fight like your life depends on it, because it does. And remember cover versus concealment. So if the bullets are flying, you want to make sure you get behind something that's actually going to stop the bullets. And remember getting down, like we said before. Lower you are, the smaller target you are. So if you have to engage the killer, which we hope, once again, we pray that we never have to, but if you have to, there's some things you need to remember. So these killers are cowards. Remember that. They want respect, or at least to be remembered, and if in infamy, then so be it. So we need to take back the offense. So the killer may have started the fight, but you need to act rather than simply reacting. And do whatever it takes. Fight to win. People are counting on you. So violence of action, this is a concept that we learned in the Marine Corps, and it's one that I'm bringing to you here today. It's not one that we typically talk about, especially in more pacifist circles, but violence of action can make a really big difference. So speed, intensity, and ferocity, so these attributes can turn the fight and send an attacker fleeing, if not overpower them completely. So a few years ago, I was actually, before I get to this story, I'd like to reiterate or point back to a couple of stories. I was realizing that this applied to a couple of the stories from the Bible that the pastor mentioned, both in Abraham's story, where he rescued Lot, and in where Saul and Samuel went and fought and defended that city. They attacked with surprise and attacked with ferocity, and the enemy was completely routed. And this isn't just cowards. These were actually trained soldiers that were completely routed by violence of action. So the story I have is from Vietnam War. A Marine Corps sniper was in an overwatch position for a company that was moving down below in a valley. Now, the way the company was moving, he needed to reposition to get a better view to continue his overwatch. While he was repositioning, he had his 1911, which is a .45 caliber pistol, 7-round magazine, 1 in the chamber, 8 rounds in his pistol, and he had his bolt-action rifle in his left hand. He encountered 6 enemy Viet Cong. They had an assortment of weapons, but primarily AK-47s, which are 30-round magazine rifles, combat rifles. So what did he do? 1 versus 6. Well, he took the initiative. He dropped his bolt-action rifle, drew a revolver, so now he has 8 plus 6, and he charges the 6 Viet Cong, firing both guns at them. He kills 2, and then the other 4, so startled and scared by the action of this one Marine, ran. The other 4 ran. So he kills 2, and the other 4 run away from one guy with, 14 rounds. By the time he was done killing 2, he pretty much didn't have any ammo left. But that violence of action caused the others to flee, and that sniper's tenacity kept him alive. So how do you engage the killer? Well, with a weapon. Around us all the time, even in a sanctuary, we have what are known as weapons of opportunity. So we got hymnals. I've listed a couple here. In some churches, they don't have pews. They actually have chairs. Or if you're not in the sanctuary, if this occurred maybe if you were at a potluck or something like that, those are usually chairs in that scenario. Chairs are an example. Fire extinguishers are heavy, so they can be used as a club, but they can also be used as a somewhat ranged device as a distraction by discharging a fire extinguisher. Tightly rolled magazines can also be used as a melee type weapon. And if we really had to, our Bibles are also known as our swords, so we could also use that. These things regularly survive fires for some reason. I bet you can guess why. But so I think they would probably be useful as well. We have also traditional melee weapons such as bats, knives, fists. Obviously, bats and knives are going to be a little less easy to find in a sanctuary, but you can always use your fists if you need to. There's also, I was looking over here at this mic stand. They often have a pretty weighted base, so that could probably count as a weapon of opportunity as well. Weapons of opportunity are really limited only by your imagination. And we also have weapons including firearms. Firearms are also a weapon that we can utilize, but when using a firearm, we need to remember that not only can they be used as effective defensive tools, but they require proper training. And that means initial training as well as recurrent training. So we have some other considerations on usage. In the Marine Corps, we were taught our weapon safety rule number 5 was know your target and what lies beyond it. I actually wanted to do a demonstration for this section, and for that I'll need 2 volunteers. So any volunteers? I just need 2. Come on up. Oh, yes, come on up. All right, that's 1. I need 1 more. Would you like to, sir? Okay, so demonstration here. Eeny, meeny, miny, you're going to be my bad guy. All right, and if you would step over here, and my bad guy, if you would be here. So know your target and what lies beyond it. If I am engaging with a firearm, and I'm behind my bad guy, and I want to take him out, can I shoot at him? Well, we got a problem here because I got some good guys or some people I would really like to save on the other side, and I don't exactly know how far my bullet's going to penetrate. So I have a couple of options. I can step to the side, and now I do have a clear shot, and it doesn't take much movement. Another option I have is to take a knee. Do I have a clear shot now? I do. So I got to consider my angles and where I'm shooting. All right, thanks. You guys can sit down. I appreciate that. We also need to consider what types of rounds we're using. If you're using a firearm, you can use fragmenting or hollow point, and self-defense rounds are typically designed for the least amount of penetration while still being effective. Because we don't want a round to carry through our target and then through the wall and through the door outside and on and on. So sometimes bigger isn't better. So we need to use the proper tool for the job. And lastly, don't shoot to kill. Remember, we're shooting to live. We're just trying to neutralize the threat. So let's say that you and your fellow congregation members took down the killer. The threat is neutralized, and you start to come down off that cocktail of adrenaline and other chemicals that are surging through your body. Hands are shaking. You're sweating, trying to process all the stuff that just happened. So the world might be spinning, but at least you won, right? At least it's over. But the thing is, it's not over. So when the police arrive on the scene, the officers are going to form a hasty fire team. The first few that are on the scene are going to join together, and they're going to enter to try and find what they're doing is searching for, and they're going to try and neutralize that active killer. So when the team comes into the building, they're going to be pretty imposing, to say the least. And it will be easier for everyone if you understand what their job is. So this team's job is to clear and secure the area. They're searching for weapons or other threats like improvised explosives. They're not there to treat the wounded, and they're not there to evacuate you. So if possible, we want to get a runner to let you know when the police when they do arrive. Because it would be best for you and the police if you do not have a weapon in your hand when they arrive. So we want to lower or holster, if we can, any weapons used prior to the police arriving. So remember, the police are responding to a shooting incident. So if you have a gun in your hand, what does that make you? Right, they don't know the difference, right? So we're going to move slowly and obey all the commands. The police are trained for these situations, so just listen to them and follow instructions. Tensions will be high, so be smart. Remember that mental preparation. So let's take a moment now and we'll put ourselves in the police officer's shoes. So we're entering an unknown, hostile situation. Who's good? Who's bad? You may think to yourself, well, I'm the good guy. I just saved the day, didn't I? Well, maybe you did, but the arriving officers don't know that. So don't take their actions personally. You may end up face down on the ground. You could get roughed up. And you could even get handcuffed. Just remember that the police are acting for your safety as well as their own. And lastly, we want to give accurate or pertinent information to as they're requested by the law enforcement. Don't try and talk to them if they're giving orders. Just follow their orders, and then if you can help them, if they ask you for something, just give them accurate, just the facts, ma'am. This is one of those old TV shows, just the facts. So after the action, so the police have secured the scene, the medical crews are tending to the injured. So there will be more work to do. The statements are going to be needed. Interviews will be conducted immediately by investigating officers. Carl Chin writes in his book about the New Life Church shooting, about spending the rest of the day and well into the night, either at the scene assisting the officers, opening doors, or answering their questions because he was the safety security team leader, or he was writing reports and checking on his fellow congregation members. And this all happened from an incident which lasted less than 4 minutes. So less than 4 minutes, and he was there for the rest of the day. So you just hang in there. It's going to be a while. So the media will probably be around to do what they do. So how do you plan to deal with them? So public relations is not my field, so I cannot offer much in the way of advice except to say that you should have a designated person for making any public statements from your organization. And then putting the pieces back together. So putting things back together should start as soon as possible. People are going to be hurt physically and mentally. And the sooner you can start putting those pieces back together, the better. the sooner you can return to some type of normalcy. So response is good. Having that mental preparation and having some kind of response is good, but organized response is better. And next I'm going to talk about a couple of resources which Pastor Witcombe and I have been drawing from in developing our own church safety program. So Evil Invades Sanctuary is a book by Carl Chin, who was a chief member of the church safety ministry at the New Life Church during the 2007 shooting incident. So in his book, Mr. Chin makes a strong case for why we need to develop church safety ministries. This book also gives a detailed account of what transpired before, during, and after the shooting. A detailed example which can serve as a learning tool for us. So a church safety ministry is not just about stopping gunmen, and it is an organized, intentional approach to deal with all the threats which face our churches at this present time. Chris Maloney has recently published his ebook as a guide for church safety directors. In this book, he recommends organizing 2 teams for dealing with hostile threats. The first is the engagement team, whose job is to de-escalate and or prepare to use force. And the second is the containment team, which moves people from the area and initiates lockdown. So some words of advice from my own experience in this preparation. There is like a lot of information out there, just tons of it. And this is a growing field of interest, and many people are very passionate about protection. So there's what I did find, which is a little bit saddening, was that much of this is geared to the mega churches. Both the books I mentioned were written by gentlemen whose security teams are larger than my congregation is on a given Sabbath. Taking key concepts and tailoring them to our own church situations is important, but it's not going to always be easy. But Rome was not built in a day, and procedures are not written overnight. Some of you are probably like me. You already hold positions on several committees at your church, but just remember that any preparation is better than no preparation. And simply by being here at this forum or watching it online, you're developing your mindset and taking steps in the right direction. And I commend you for that effort. Don't bully people with safety, though. Do not beat people over the head with your chosen ministry. Yes, it is important. Yes, the subject matter here is very serious. But so is the winning of souls. Don't drive people away with your message or processes or your attitude. Remember our purpose. Sheepdogs protect the sheep. They don't make fun of or belittle the sheep for being sheep. Every person has their own unique set of gifts. And just because someone doesn't like your focus and refuses your ideas does not make them any less a child of God. So there may be some of you here today, or those listening online, who might be thinking to yourself, well, that's all good. That's all well and good, Mr. Webster, but what if I am a sheep? What if I am, how can I promote safety and be helpful during an active killer event? And to you, figurative listener, I want to start with the first part of your question. So safety, just remember, safety is not about guns, not just about guns or killers. We also have other events like fire, earthquake, tornado, and many more that affect our church. And just remember that sheepdogs can get a little bit preoccupied with the wolf. And you can get involved with planning procedures or implementing policy and volunteering to help mitigate any of the risks that you feel comfortable with. And although the sheepdogs can get preoccupied, sometimes they think about the wolf, they worry about the wolf, and sometimes the sheepdog becomes only concerned with the wolf. And the sheep can help with reminding the sheepdog that other threats exist too. So what should the flock do? So during an active killer event, I propose these 3 steps. Get down, get small, and get out. Now this last one I kind of have a double meaning on. So firstly, you want to get out of the situation as best you can as the sheep. But the other thing is you want to get out of the way. your sheepdogs or the police will be trying to engage that active killer and defend you. And it's not going to be helpful if you're in between them and their target, and in between the threat and your protection. So we don't buckle our safety seatbelts and then sit down in the seat. We want the seatbelt to be around us. So the other thing from day to day, so outside of the active killer event, just remember as the flock, try to understand the sheepdog, where they're coming from. They have your best interests in mind, and sometimes although you may not agree with their position, just remember that they care about safety just as much as you do. And then sometimes you may need to remind the sheepdog that we need to focus on our real mission, which is the Great Commission. So after today, with the information you have learned here and the more that you're going to pick up this afternoon, I implore you to start your church safety ministry. So remember, we are not a security force. We're not a security service. We are not law enforcement. We're just members who are concerned for the safety of our church body, and we want to do the right thing and proactively protect our fellow believers. Protect the flock, or at least your portion of it, and remember to continue learning. Pastor Witcombe and I have just gotten started with this process at our home church, and although the task is daunting, we're kind of used to that as Christians. We regularly face daunting tasks, like preach to the whole world. But I want to thank you for inviting us today, and thank you for spending time with me on this very serious topic. My name's Jonathan Webster, and it's been a pleasure to be with you.
Jonathan, thank you so much. And I just want to make a few announcements, and then we'll have a word of prayer and go down for lunch. So lunch is for everyone. Everyone is welcome to join us. And we are going to be having an afternoon program continuing in the same line of thought. So the goal is to start at 2:15 this afternoon. And Brother Jeff Johnson, by the way, he's had the same problem here in this church with PowerPoint to Apple. So he knows all about your frustrations. But I think it was, all in all, it could have been a lot worse, right? People got the message, and we're thankful for Jonathan and Pastor Witcombe coming to share. We're going to have a question and answers after Jeff Johnson's presentation. So Sawyer just passed out some papers, and we're going to have a little offering plate. You can put money in here too if you want. I will not discourage that at all. But if you have any questions, write them down. I'm going to put it right here on top of the piano. And if you're we have several people watching online right now. I've been following a little bit those that are watching, so I want to encourage them to send in their questions. Right there, there's a chat on the YouTube channel, or you can email them to our church website email. So at this time, we're going to have a word of prayer. And Pastor Witcombe, why don't you come back up, and we're going to invite you to pray. And you can go ahead and pray for the meal as we close.
Let's bow our heads. Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for your word that instructs us and tells us the truth on questions that we have. We thank you that we've had this time together to consider this issue from the biblical standpoint, the practical standpoint, and I pray for all our churches that we will pray to our God and post a guard, and that we will do our part. And Father, also I ask your blessing upon the food that's been prepared, that it might nourish and strengthen us. And we pray these things in Jesus' worthy name. Amen.
All right, lunch downstairs. Enjoy the fellowship and the meal. 2:15 back up here. Brother Jeff Johnson will talk about church safety.